What would you like to see change in your life? And what is the biggest obstacle that you're facing now? I run a 5-week program at the Inner Knowing School for serious individuals who are ready to take the next step in their personal and professional lives. I will personally be coaching a small group of individuals, a number of practical tools and frameworks for creating an intuition practice and for self mastery. You can find more at theinnerknowingschool.com. I have a master's certification in intuition medicine, and I've condensed 10 plus years of experience and research navigating how to harness your energy and intuition in an easy to access live curated course. Now, as someone who's helped countless creatives, entrepreneurs, and many who are just plain stuck, open doors of possibility they never thought existed, I've seen this strategy transform people's inner states and external reality. And the best part is that you'll skyrocket your output and unlock your creative genius. I'll work with you weekly live to overcome your limiting beliefs and show you how to manage your energy instead of your time. I'll teach you how to create clarity, processes, develop your intuition based on some of the top tools and frameworks that I've developed. And you'll get access to guided meditations and visualizations not available anywhere else. This method is so effective that even if you don't have that much time, or if you think that you might not be ready, this will work for you. You can check out the link in the show notes to join the waiting list, and you can check out what past clients had to say about the program. Wishing you all many blessings ahead. I'd like to thank our sponsors, Blood Moon Box, a monthly subscription box service for period pads and tampons to help support all humans who have a cycle for that time of the month, and no need to run to a store to mix and match period supplies that don't cater to the entire ebbs and flows of your cycle. There are 2 box options based on your cycle, light and medium, and then heavy. And in addition to the period products, you'll also receive PMS herbal teas, a candle, and some other items for your time of the month. You can reserve a box by navigating to bloodmoonbox.com. And bloodmoonbox.com is on a mission to destigmatize the idea of period blood. At Blood Moon Box, they believe that it is the time to honor the enchanting magic within every person who has a cycle. So join us in embracing the magic of your cycle with Blood Moon Box. Hi, my name is Yasmin Tarehi, and this is Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Today's episode is about your brain on art with Ivy Ross, the Vice President for Design for the hardware organization at Google. Over the past 6 years, Ivy and her team have launched 50 plus products, winning over 240 global design awards. And a winner of a National Endowment for the Arts grant, Ivy's innovative metalwork in jewelry is the permanent collections of 12 international museums. And she's also 9th on Fast Company's list of the 100 most creative people in business in 2019. Ivy believes the intersection of arts and science is where the most engaging and creative ideas are found. And we're going to also talk about her newest book, which is called Your Brain on Art. So welcome to the show, Ivy.
Thank you. And I just wanted to state I'm the co-author. I wrote the book along with Susan Mag-Salmon, who's at the Arts and Mind Lab at Johns Hopkins Medical University.
Oh, amazing. Okay, great. We'll definitely add her in the show notes. So, Ivy, to kick it off, why do you say that art is kind of the language of humanity?
Well, way back when it wasn't even a word, the word art in indigenous tribes, and it's still going on. They just lived life. What we now call art was a way of living. It was culture. There was dance, and there still is in some communities, but dance, storytelling, painting, theater. And so we didn't have to call it the word art, but it's the way we've lived from the beginning. And then somehow we pushed these arts aside, but they're actually our universal language in terms of the way we communicate.
And, why have we lost this kind of way of living in the West and in modern culture? And how are people kind of trying to get back to that space of creativity? How are you noticing that happening?
Well, I mean, I think we lost it a couple of things. I think we've been optimizing for productivity since the Industrial Revolution and kind of pushed the arts aside as nice to have or something elitist. Or I many of us who were involved in the arts as children were told you'll never make a profession out of it, you're no good at it. And so we've put that aside, and it really is a crime that we put it aside because it's critical for our health and well-being, and I guess we can get into that. The other reason I think they've been pushed aside is when the Sputnik threat came in, all of a sudden there was this emphasis on science and math, science and math. And again, all the arts got pushed aside. And so, what's been great about writing this book with Susan from Johns Hopkins is now science is starting to prove that the arts are critical for our health and well being. And so, when Susan called me a few years ago and said, we now have the proof, I mean, at first I thought, I know that the arts are great for us. And I realized most people don't understand that intuitively. And therefore, having the science to back it up would be super important. So that's why we decided to write the book.
So I want to dig into this because I think that really understanding how art affects our emotions and our mental state, and you say that there's now science to prove it. Can you talk a little bit about what's come out in the last couple of years, and how can we convince people who maybe are still stuck in that science and math rigidity to really pay attention to this, to the arts?
Yeah. Well, first of all, there's a great quote that Jill Bolte Taylor says, which is, we think we're thinking beings that have learned to feel, but we're actually feeling beings that have learned to think. And I think that's super important because if you accept that, which I do, and what she's talking about is that we're literally, in our development as humans, it's only been more recently that we've developed the ability to think, but we have been feeling beings um, all along. And that means that taking things in through our sensory systems is critical. I did an experiment at Susan and I did it Milan Design Fair in 2019, where we had people spend time in 3 different room settings with different sensorial experiences: music, color, taste, sound, shapes, lighting. And they wore a band that my team and I did at Google with an algorithm with with Johns Hopkins. And we asked people to just spend 5 minutes in each space, listening to the music, looking at the art, feeling, just being. That's why it was called a space for being. And then at the end of spending 5 minutes in each of the 3 rooms, we downloaded and, of course, then deleted the data from the band that each person was wearing. And we'd say to them, in which room did you like the best? And the person would say number 2, for example. But their body showed that it was room number 3, that their physiology was actually more comfortable, more at ease, less stressed. And I remember saying to Susan, if at least 58% of the people don't have a disconnect between their mind and body, we're going to be in trouble here. But luckily, I think it was 59% of the folks did have that disconnect. And what it was showing is that we are feeling all the time. And sometimes, because many times people would walk into the room and say, I love that room. And that's because their cognitive mind has seen a picture of something similar or it reminds them of a friend's house. But that doesn't mean that their body is feeling good in that space. And so science has been able to, in the last 20 years, get into our heads in a non-invasive way and see, what part of our brain lights up during some of these different sensorial experiences. And it's very complex. It touches a lot of different parts in our brain, but it is clear that the more our senses are alive, it's also the way we make new with neuroplasticity, new synapse connections. When we are looking at a piece of art or something beautiful in the forest, these salient experiences, which are experiences that have an emotional component, make new synapses. And what I learned through writing the book with Susan, and I had no idea, is that old connections will be thrown away, so to speak, as these new neural connections are made. And so it's almost just like I think we're new people every 7 years because our cells die, and over 7 years, every cell has been replaced. Well, the fact that we can literally be wiring new brains based on the experiences we have, the places we go, the things we touch, the way we express ourselves. So it's remarkable. So I think what's happened is being able to have access to more of what goes on in the brain without invasive technologies and understanding neuroplasticity. Those two things has given us new information that makes us understand how important the arts are. And when we say the arts, it isn't just painting; it is dancing, singing, um, working with sculpting with clay, architecture, theater. It's really those things where we are expressing ourselves. And it's not just the maker, it's also the beholder.
So you said a lot. I want to double
I
click
did.
on. Yeah, it's amazing, amazing, really. So you said there's a lot of things. I think in the beginning experiment, I want to talk a little bit about that. How you said that there's almost like half the people in the room, not quite, right? Had a disconnect between the mind and the body when it came to a sense of discernment, right? And like what was happening, which I think is so interesting. Like that point in itself, which almost like kind of proves how many people maybe wouldn't really understand the effect or the impact of art on how they feel, right? And then the other piece, is just that there's so many ways that we can enter this space. It doesn't have to be just through painting, right? Because I think when people think of art, sometimes they have narrow categories, but you're saying it's all the spectrum of kind of moving outside of the analytical mind of engaging with something. So dancing and sculpting. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's getting out of that cognitive mind and almost in a way playing, play is stepping outside of something you do every day, but without a preconceived outcome. And when I say we've been optimizing for productivity, I think we're very outcome driven nowadays. And so a lot of this is really also about playing with some of these artistic endeavors where there is no expectation. You're just freely expressing yourself.
Yeah, that part I think is very novel. A lot of people spend so much time, I think, trying to perfect something or, chisel away. Because I think, frankly, a lot of people are worried about criticism. But the idea of just enjoying art for art's sake and connecting with yourself is something I think it's a new concept right now in the modern world. So I'm curious, how do you incorporate art in your own life, Ivy?
Oh, well, I have, well, what I do for a living is, we are making things with my team. So I have a great creative team. But personally, um, I have some pastel crayons, and every morning before I go to work, I literally just scribble different colors, different lines, make different marks. I mean, because when I get to work, there is expected outcome. But what I do for myself in the morning is just to play in my mind with new possibilities. How does this color look layered on top of that color? And, science is now showing that 15 minutes of doing something like I do every morning, using pastels or singing or dancing or humming. I mean, it lowers your cortisol after 15 minutes, your cortisol level, which is your stress level. And I think part of that is because it's really just being free to express and explore without the pressures of, as you said, making something perfect or making anything.
Right, right, right.
In
Yeah.
fact, they actually have been proved that science has now proved that by doodling, you are increasing your focus and your memory. And, I know I remember getting my hand slapped in school for doodling. And the truth is, by doodling, I'm actually retaining more of what the teacher was saying while I was doodling than if I hadn't been doodling.
That's so funny and so on point, right? Yeah, I think that there's an assumption that, you know, doodling or even painting or drawing in class is like you not paying attention, but you're saying that it actually helps you retain memory, which is
Yes, and
it's just
focus, and yeah, and this a lot of these different arts. It's also getting into that. When there's been many books written on flow states, but that zone where you go, deeper and deeper, focusing into just one thing, where you're so curious that you're in this just discovery mindset.
mm, it's really phenomenal. And like for people who are listening, if they've never done anything kind of artistic in their life, what would you tell them to do as like kind of a first playful exercise? Maybe something that you found in your studies that everyone can kind of try.
Well, taking a lump of clay and just first of all doing something with both hands, like taking clay and just as if you're kneading bread, just starting to squeeze it with both hands and seeing what your hands just want to make without any judgment. It's interesting because it's your conscious and unconscious. There's not too many things that use your right and left hand at the same time. Sorry, but working with clay does, and so it's remarkable. I have a friend, a sculptress, who would have a group of us just play with clay and just see what wants to emerge from your hands. And then you'd kind of, this form would emerge and you would look at it and then you'd go, okay. And then you'd take the clay again, mush it up, make something else. And she'd have us write down, use our imagination, like what did we see in each of these forms? And then at the end, make up a little story about it. But it's amazing what, if you just let your hands do the walking, so to speak, and just start playing with clay, these shapes and things come out, and then you apply your imagination to them. I mean, it's such a fun exercise. Again, no judgment. The key is no judgment. I mean, it really is about giving ourselves permission to express and to play for no one else but ourselves, and to understand how good that is for our mind and our body.
Yeah, absolutely. So, how can art kind of help us maybe even process or even express our feelings? Because I think, going back to this exercise, the disconnection between how our mind is perceiving something and how our body, our physiology, perhaps our intuition is perceiving something, there's a disconnect there for most people. So, how can people use art to actually kind of process or even express hidden feelings that they may not even know that they have?
Yeah, well, it's funny in the book, and we interviewed my co-author and I about 100 different people, um, everything from artists or people like David Byrne to the opera singer Renee Fleming to E.O. Wilson, to scientists, and even people who work with um, people and children in war. And there's a chapter, the book is organized by not each art modality, dancing, singing, painting, but by end states. mental health, physical health, um, community. I mean, different ways that you could use art. But one of the things we discovered a lot in trauma, and we all have micro traumas every day, but is when there are no words for something, is when drawing or art really brings out what's inside. So often you can't put words to how you're feeling, but, and they do this a lot with young kids who have had, you know, trauma, who can't express themselves. You give them a crayon and just tell them to make something, and this whole story comes out. So this idea that if you can let go of your cognitive mind of trying to control the story and just express, you know, it's amazing what comes out. And even they've been doing some studies, even writing down a secret or something you've never told someone and putting it on a piece of paper, just the act of writing it down changes your physiology, because you've let it, you've brought it forward, you've brought it from within to the outer world. And so this idea of expressing ourselves, um, even if it's just a piece of paper, we write it and then we throw it away, no one has to read it, that in itself lowers your cognitive load.
Fascinating. I did not know that about writing. That's pretty amazing, and that makes sense. Like if we are not moving it outside of us, it just sort of remains in our field of thoughts and consciousness and takes up space, right? Where if we let it out, then we have more space.
Yeah, well, emotions is energy in motion. So we have to keep moving those emotions through us. And when we don't, they get stuck. And that's when we get depressed or ill.
Right, right. So, what are some ways that art can kind of influence our perceptions and perspectives? Like, what are some of the ways that you've seen art kind of shape our values in society as well?
Well, I mean, I think artists are kind of the shamans of our time almost, um, because artists are true, artists who they're tapping into, and anyone can be an artist, but you're tapping into what's inside, or moving forward and bringing it back to society to experience and to look at and be challenged by. So I think there's actually a program where they're taking doctors to museums and having them look at paintings or abstract art. And they ask them three questions. And the first one is, what do you see? And the person usually, says what they see on like level one. There's a big yellow ball, and there's a dog or whatever's going on that you just see at the first layer. And then the person says, okay, and now what do you see? And then the third question is, and what do you see now? And it is giving even these doctors this idea that there's always ways to see beyond what you're seeing if you choose to go deeper and deeper. And it's changing even the way they interact with patients in terms of going further in terms of what they see versus just what the surface data will tell them. So I think the act of engaging with art, now we're moving to that versus making it, and putting yourself in front of new ideas or new pieces of art, not only does it potentially connect the dots and make new neural pathways, um, but it's really it's exercising your brain to make new neural connections, which we should be doing all the time versus staying stagnant and just keep looking at the same things we're comfortable with versus stepping outside and looking at new kinds of art or new art forms, um, in order to make these new neural connections and to maybe see things we wouldn't have seen about ourselves, because sometimes art can be a reflection or a mirror back to ourselves.
Mm. Yeah, wow, it's powerful. And I'm also curious how it's shaping our cultural values as well as some of the norms, that we have. Like, how does art kind of reflect that back to us as well?
Well, art's a communication tool. Um, and that's why art has been used in communities. Even in the poorest communities, they'll paint murals of their um, ethnicity and values on walls to, again, mirror back to the community who it is and to remind everyone, in some cases, of what's possible. So I think it's really a communication tool, either from our own inside to the outside or to each other in a more abstract way than maybe words. But words are an art form as well. So communicating through writing and storytelling is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I really appreciate that communication tool piece. The expression of self comes in any socioeconomic space and demographic, and it's sort of just like an international kind of global way to communicate.
Yeah, even like cooking together. I mean, cooking is an art form, and there's been studies eating together. There's actually less tension between people, less um, arguments. It brings people together, sharing some of these art forms together.
So I have to ask, since generative AI is now the big craze. I know this was not necessarily in your book, but I'm just curious because I think a lot of people are sort of discussing like what is AI's impact on art, and I'm just curious if you have a opinion or kind of a philosophy of where art is going with AI.
Yeah, so particularly with AI, I think actually it's going to force us to be more creative, um, which I think is a great thing because AI may start to, well, two things. In generative AI, that is only as creative as the prompt is or the question you ask. But I think as AI comes in and does certain things for us, even in product design, it might start generating 100 different versions of a product idea where I might put into AI the qualifications. Like if I'm designing a chair, it has to hold 110 pounds. It has to, cost X amount, just some parameters. It might generate 100 different ideas, but then it's going to be our job to add the poetry to that, because we may look at that and it's almost the framework. And then I think it's going to be up to us to be imaginative and use our senses, which only we have, our sensory systems, to push that idea or design even further. So I think AI is going to force us to be more imaginative and creative as a species. Um, and we may not even know what that looks like yet. Like I know we're all sitting here going, well, what does that really look like in the day to day? And I don't have that answer, but I know that it is. We're going to have to find then, okay, if this is being generated by AI, what is it that we add in the mix, and what does that uh, co-collaboration look like? Because I think it will become a collaboration. Every technology that I mean, look at what we've done, how us humans have used the internet, right? Um, we've created some extraordinary capabilities because of it. So I don't know yet what it's going to look like, but I have to say, and I think that's one of the reasons why, and that's one of the reasons why we wrote, Your Brain on Art at this point in time also, is to say we need to focus on what makes us human, which our sensory systems do. Um, I mean, we need our brains as well, but these other parts of us, it's time we get embodied and get some practice with using that, because I think we're going to be called to amplify that part of us even more.
Mm, I see. Yeah, yeah. Super fascinating. I completely understand your point of view on that, and I think that makes a ton of sense. It's like the you're only as creative as the question you ask. I really love that so much, and I do think it'll force us to be more creative. Yeah, and I think that there's so many interesting use cases, coming out online of people who are using AI, and some of it feels generative, and some of it feels kind of, I don't know. It doesn't seem like it's adding much value.
Yeah. Well, like anything, we have to be, society has to hold hands and decide, what what's right, what's wrong. I mean, a car can be helpful getting you where you want to go, and a car can hit someone. It's like everything has its tension of opposites. And, don't get me wrong, AI has good things and bad things. And so we all, like I said, as society, have to hold hands and make clear what's acceptable and what isn't.
Right, right. So, Ivy, I want to talk a little bit about why you decided to write this book with your co-author, and why now. I mean, you spoke a little bit about it with the question about generative AI, but I'm curious. You mentioned that you've been working in this field for a long time. You've done a lot of studies over the years, but why now? Why did you write this book, and why now?
Yeah. So basically, I've been a designer, an artist, a creator my whole life. And um, I've also studied sound and vibration and kind of the mysteries of life. So Susan reached out to me about 5 years ago. Her lab, the Arts and Mind Lab, has been gathering a lot of the data of these different modalities in terms of, music, sound, painting, um, all these different modalities, theater, what they do to the brain and body. And so she's been following, unbeknownst to me, it was a LinkedIn, and said, I've been following your career for 25 years. I'd love to talk to you. And so I said, okay, the first thing is that's called stalking. Following my career for 25 years. But she said, science is now proving that the arts can help our minds and body, and they're critical to our health and well-being. And I said, I know that. That's why I do what I do. And she said, and I said, but wait a minute, you're right. Now that there's the science to prove it, I said it would be great if the masses understood this, because I see so many people shut down because they've stopped expressing themselves, or they think they're not good at it, the self imposed judgment, or it's not important. Um, I know so many people who wanted to become a musician or a painter or a dancer, but their parents told them, you'll never make a living at that. And little did they know what they were shutting down for that soul at that time, the ability to express. So we started actually writing the book pre uh, COVID, and it became even more, with the right now, mental health is becoming actually more of an issue than physical health. And so little did we know how important the book would be at this time. And as we've been going around giving book talks in various cities, I mean, we have people just coming up to us saying, oh my God, you've given me permission, to do these things again. And it's interesting because it's like, wow, just hearing that it makes us feel so good that just sharing, and, in our book talks, we share more of the data, and it's all in the book, but it is like people are waiting for permission to do some of these arts, or just to, even things like humming or singing while you're driving. People have been so grateful, saying, thank you, you've given me the information. This book has given me permission to pick up a crayon again, or to, dance around the house and not think it was silly, or to pick up a paintbrush. Because we have stories, we have incredible stories in the book. Like, I'll give you an example. This one woman that she started a group called Art to Ashes, and she was taking frontline firemen coming out of fires who had just had trauma. I mean, they had to leave a burning body behind, and she would give them a paintbrush and a canvas and say, start painting now. Just move your hand, get the paint on the canvas. And we interviewed this young fireman that said, oh my God, it changed my life. Just immediately releasing what I was feeling on that canvas, not caring about the way it looked, um, changed his frame of mind, that he'd go home to his family that night. Uh, and he now goes from fire department to the fire department, firehouse to firehouse, teaching, um, helping teach just these different ways of expressing.
Wow. That's amazing. Very, very incredible that someone would even come up with that idea, but that makes so much sense, especially when there's so much trauma, right? Like the moment that there's a lot of trauma, to just get it out in an artistic fashion.
Yeah, because if you can get it out immediately in the moment, because I mean, like, we all have micro traumas, as I was saying, every day, and we just suppress them. And then more come on top and on top and on top. And then at a point you either explode or disease happens because you haven't released it. So I go back to that idea of everything is we need to keep things in motion, keep things moving. We're dynamic beings. And so it's moving all of that energy through us, all those feelings out of us. Whereas I think we can think these things away. We can't really think them away. We can, in our cognitive mind, try to justify things, but it doesn't move things through our body. Actually, engaging our sensory systems move things through our body.
Mm. So, yeah, and I've noticed even like when animals have some kind of trauma, they end up like shaking it off or kind of moving. There's just, and we just,
Exactly.
we sort of just get frozen. So Ivy, I want to talk about your kind of intuitive practice, because I think that it's interesting to note like how the body really holds a lot of memory, and I'm curious because we both attended the same program called the Academy of Intuition Medicine. But curious what drew you to that space, and why you think intuition is also important to this work.
Well, I've been mesmerized. 95% of the information we take in goes into our unconscious. I mean, only 5% stays in our frontal lobe, in our cognitive mind. And so there's a wealth of information that comes from everything we've experienced. 95% of what we've experienced. So actually, I know sometimes in the companies, when I was a designer, they would say, well, why do you feel that color is the right color? Or why do you feel that shape? And I said, because that feeling I have actually comes from more data, uh, which is called my unconscious, than any data, in my conscious mind right now. So I've always been fascinated with the unconscious, and I studied Jungian psychology for a while. But I early on started tapping into my intuition, and that idea of a gut feeling, and now they find out that our gut and our brains are connected. um, I think it's so powerful because it's the place where most of the information that we've experienced resides. So when we can actually tap into our intuition, it's really powerful. And once you start trusting it, um, it kind of doesn't let you down. I know, I started doing it when I was fairly early in my career, and you just need it to work a couple of times, and then it's like a muscle that you exercise. But you have to, be willing to go, um, yeah, deep inside and tap into it. So I loved the fact that there was a program called, intuition medicine. I had studied energy medicine, which is another word for vibrational medicine, because I definitely believe in the power of vibration, sound. I mean, that's all there is. We're just vibrating atoms that's dense. So I think this idea of getting in resonance with things um, that vibrate at the same level is is magical. But yeah, intuition is powerful because it's ours. It's our own intuition that comes from our own database that is all knowing.
Fascinating. Yeah, I love that you tied it to sound because I think that piece is where people are like, well, what does it mean to have like energy? But when you say sound, it's like, okay, we can all relate to that. So, Ivy, what sort of things, kind of looking back on your journey, what sort of things have surprised you the most, when it comes to art, when it comes to the human mind, and also how you've navigated that? Like what has kind of surprised you as like a theme?
Well, I always look for patterns. I'm definitely I'm someone who's always followed my intuition. I pay attention to what gets my attention, and then I kind of go down the rabbit hole. So, and I always ask a lot of questions because I'm very, very curious. I've always been a curious person. So when I played the drums as a kid, it would be, wow, I feel so ironically relaxed when I play the drums. And it's because my heart was getting in resonance with the drum beat and I felt very connected. And then I want to understand like what's out here between you and me in that airspace. Is there vibrations? Are there patterns? So I've been this kind of, I call a child of wonder my whole life of studying things and asking questions, which leads me to another question. So I remember I got into sound also in part because I read about a man that was bombarding cancer cells with musical notes who was a jazz musician under a microscope in France.
Wow.
And so I'm like one of these crazy people that, I think at the time I was a president of a division of Calvin Klein. And when I read about this man, I just felt in my body, there is some truth to this. I have to understand it. And I hopped on a plane, the red eye, out of New York City on Friday night. He was coming to California, actually. So studied with him over the weekend and hopped back on the red eye Sunday night and went right to work Monday morning. And I was so energized with the information that I had learned from studying with him, which was really the reason why I felt in my body this was true is, they use ultrasound to break up kidney stones. And so it's like if you could find the resonant frequency of two things dance together and then they shatter. It's like the way an opera singer breaks a glass when she hits a certain note. So that kind of in my, imaginative mind, I could see all of a sudden, okay, that's all the universe is a series of vibrations. And there's magic when we find these resonant frequencies. So as a creative person, I've kind of um, made my own magical mystery tour of wanting to asking myself questions. I'm probably, maybe I could say I've been the prompt designer of my own life. I keep asking these questions and then paying attention to what shows up and then diving deeper into it and being in awe of the wonder of it all, staying open, I guess, um, without any preconceived notions. So I guess I'm walking my talk around this idea of staying in that playful state some of the time to be able to then make some of the connections that I do. I've also studied something called biogeometry, which is with an Egyptian architect who, explains the secret of, you know, shapes. And the Egyptians knew this, angles of the pyramid. And he'd have us work with the pendulum. And just by shifting the angle of two lines, the pendulum swings an entirely different way because you're interrupting the vibrational field in a different angle. And so, you know, all these different things I've studied, it's additive, and I keep getting um, a clearer and clearer vision. I can't even put a lot of into words of understanding the mysteries of the universe, which is super fun.
I totally hear you on that, especially with this show. I'm like, wow, there's so much, but it's hard to explain, right? Because a lot of it is the invisible world, and not necessarily things we can like perceive with our five senses.
And by the way, science is finding out there's as many as like 50 senses at least. So we haven't even brought all of them online. So stay tuned.
Yeah, totally. I just did a talk about that actually, about how we just assume we have these five senses, but actually there's quite a number of extrasensory senses that we just sort of haven't brought into the mainstream. So Ivy, I want to talk a little bit about like the maybe people in your life that may have been influential, or people that you admire, and who's really kind of helped you move forward on your path. And yeah, I'm just curious, like who are your mentors?
Oh God, there have been hmm, so many, depending on who I encounter in life. There's a woman named Makara Meredith who's studying to be a Buddhist monk, and I encountered her in my life at one point, and she changed my life. And then there's Dr. John Billier, who was one of my first sound teachers, who um, put a lot of the pieces together for me. Um, uh, Fabian Mamon, who uh, had me stare for an hour at colored circles and understand the different frequencies and vibration that came off of each color. Um, a woman named Jackie Sussman, who does something called eidetic imagery, which really shows us that our operating system in our brain is based on the images that we've held throughout our life. I mean, there's been so many teachers. There isn't one master, you know, a guru or teacher. There's been along my journey. The important thing is I realized early on in life, because when I was 20 something, I got my work in museums, because I was a very inventive kid, because I asked a lot of questions, right? I was this child of wonder and curiosity. And then I'd ask myself a question and stay in the studio relentlessly until I solved it. And that would equal a technological breakthrough. My work would get in a museum. I that Getting my work in museums in my 20s, that high lasted for about 2 weeks. I mean, some people spend their whole life wanting that. And I realized, oh my God, life is about the journey. It's not about the end goal. Because I had already obtained what some people spend their whole life trying to obtain. And here I had done it in my 20s. And I realized it's not about that. It's about the journey. And so I'm going to make sure that this journey is as exciting as possible. Um, and so that's why I think I, paid attention about what got my attention, and then would um, have these different chapters of things I've studied, connections I've made, places. I started this nonprofit called Life's Little Adventures that um, I would take friends um, to the Amazon jungle or to climb mountains in Patagonia. We'd all pool our money. I mean, to have shared experiences together. So there have just been joyful things. Because I believe that not only there's everything is pattern recognition, but also it's all about relationships. To ourselves, to each other, to nature. The book talks a lot about neuroaesthetics, and aesthetics is these things are alive in our senses, but the most neuroaesthetic place there is nature, because it has light, temperature, color, shape, sound, and it is our true nature. It's where we came from. So talk about health and wellness. I mean, like 20 minutes in nature changes your physiology for sure. And so I've made sure that I've had life's little adventures in nature a lot. So I'm very super grateful for my journey. And I have encountered many people along the way um, that, that have changed my life. And I see my life as a series of chapters.
Wow, Ivy, that's so inspirational. Thank you for sharing that. I took a couple notes, so and I love that you created a nonprofit to take adventures and bring people together, and a lot of times in nature, because I think those are the moments we all remember in our life. It's the relationships we've had and the experiences that we've had, and so I really, really appreciate that. So, what do you want to tell our listeners about your main takeaway? What's the kind of your big call to action for folks listening in?
Yeah, I mean, if you can just, and this is what the book said, 20 minutes a day of just like we've now learned to exercise, we've learned that sleep is good for us. I mean, 20 minutes a day of just doing some art form that allows you to express yourself. Or if you feel like you can't at all do anything, just even listen to music, listen to sound, bang on a drum, be out, outside for 20 minutes a day, but almost this practice that you do for yourself. Because I think what I want for people is that they spend time um, finding out, who they really are and what their soul needs, and bring, pure joy without any um, fixation on the end result, but just being able to play a little. So I would love for people to be able to play with some of these ideas and play with your senses and make time in our busy schedules to do something without a preconceived goal.
Amazing, amazing. And where can people find you, Ivy, if they want to connect with you? Where can they find your book to stay in touch?
The book is Your Brain on Art: How the Arts Transform Us, and it's by myself, Ivy Ross, and Susan Mag Salmon, my co-author. And we have a website, www.yourbrainonart.com. And our Instagram handle is Your Brain on Art Book. So between those two places and on the website, there's a way to contact us.
Amazing. Okay. And we'll leave that also in the show notes so that people can find it. Thank you so much for your time, Ivy. This was so lovely. And I feel very inspired. I'm going to go do a little bit of drawing myself after this conversation.
Okay, go for it. Thank
Amazing.
you so much, and thanks for everything you do. I think your show is terrific.
Oh, thank you so much, Ivy. Thank you. And for our audience, thanks for joining and for listening. In this episode, we learned about your mind on art with Ivy Ross. And you can tune in to Gateways to Awakening, where we host one-on-one conversations with leading experts in wellness, well-being, and spirituality. Thanks again.